And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecasts for tomorrow for the south coast of the Panhandle. Still small craft advisories, winds out of the northwest at 25 knots. Seas running just under 10 feet. Central coast northwest 20 to 25 knots. And west 15 to 20 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal southwest wind 10 knots. And for Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait, northwesterlies of 15, seas 2 to 3 feet. And for the day on Sunday, Lynn Canal, south breeze at 10 knots and northwest at 10 to 15 knots for the central southern inside channels. And no change for the south coast here. Still small craft advisory, 25 knot winds there out of the northwest and northwest 20 for the central coast. North coast looking at west winds at about 15 knots. And moving on to Cook Inlet, south to southwest, 15 knots tomorrow. And for Saturday, Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, both out of the southeast at 20 knots with seas 4 to 5 feet. Western North Gulf Coast, light variable winds, 10 knots. Prince William Sound, winds light and variable at 10 knots. And for the day Sunday, no change for Prince William Sound, light winds and 2-foot sea heights. Western North Gulf Coast, variable at 10. Otherwise, west-southwest 15 over toward Middleton Island. And Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands here. No change, southeast winds at 20 knots and south to southwest breeze at 10 to 15 for Cook Inlet. Alaska Peninsula for Saturday, south winds 20 to 30 knots, southeast at 20 for Bristol Bay. And Kodiak Island, Fognak Island, Shelikof Strait, south winds at 20 knots. And for Sunday, Kodiak Island waters, south to southeast, 15 to 20 knots. Bristol Bay, small craft advisory, southeast at 25 knots. But seas only at about 3 feet. And south to southwest winds for the Alaska Peninsula, mostly 20 knots with 4 to 7 foot seas. And for the central western Aleutians tomorrow, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, south winds 25 to 30 knots with seas 4 to 8 feet. And for Sunday, central eastern Aleutians, south winds 15 to 20 knots. South to southwest, 15 knots for the Adak-Atka area, and the western Aleutians, southwest at 15. And for the Pribilof Islands, Saturday, south wind 20 knots, seas 5 feet, northeast 15, 5-foot seas, St. Matthew Island. Small craft advisories here for the southwest coast. Southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, strongest south of Nunivak Island. St. Lawrence Island, small craft advisories, southeast at 30, and Norton Sound, east winds 25 knots with 5-foot seas. And for Saturday, south winds 25 knots for Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta Coast, 30 knot south winds here for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, 6-foot seas. And for the Pribilofs, west winds at 20 knots, northwest at 20 for St. Matthew Island. Eastern Arctic coast, east to northeast breeze at 15 knots, even lighter for the central coast at about 10 knots, north at 10 for the western Arctic coast. Chukchi Sea, 10 to 15 knot winds from varying directions. And then on Sunday, we've got 15 to 20 knot winds for the Chukchi Sea out of the east and southeast. Northeast 15 for the western Arctic coast, central coast light out of the east, and then increasing winds here. Small craft advisories over the eastern Beaufort Sea coast of 15 to 25 knots. And for tonight, again, rain, thunderstorms, and showers move into the eastern interior all the way over to the border and a little to the east later tonight, up to the Arctic coast north slope. Little bit of a break right through here. Next system spreading rain into the southwest coast, down to the Alaska Peninsula. Yet another front keeping it wet over the Aleutians. Through tomorrow, breaks out a little bit. Here it comes more showery for Adak westward, but rain for the eastern Aleutians. Rain up into the southwest coast, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, spilling into the Kuskokwim Valley, maybe Kodiak Island, and much cooler over the eastern interior, but not too bad precipitation-wise. Another nice day for the Panhandle. And for Sunday, stays nice for the southeast coast and dry with light winds. And dry again with temperatures recovering a little bit back into the lower 80s here over the eastern interior, but still pretty cool, wet, and cloudy in the west from Kodiak Island all the way up to the western Arctic coast. And another front brings some light precipitation into the central Aleutians.